I'm George Walreich. I'm the president and CEO of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, which I know you all know is the oldest professional organization in the United States. And tonight, our third annual Story Slam is a co-presentation of, and this gets complicated, the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, its section on medicine and the arts, which is a group of people, some of whom are fellows and some who are just members of that section, who are interested in the intersection of medicine and the arts broadly defined. And the third co-sponsor is the Delaware Valley Medical Student Wellness Collaborative, of which all 7 medical schools in the greater Delaware Valley, plus the College of Physicians, have formed a separate not-for-profit corporation to seek to increase wellness and enjoyment amongst the medical students in the 7 medical schools, probably more in this area than anywhere in the world, 5 on one side of the river and 2 on the other side. This event has been organized both by Lauren Wilson, who is with the Delaware Valley Medical Student Collaborative, Samantha Carr of the College of Physicians, and particularly I'm going to introduce him now, and I will stop talking, Dean Douglas Reiffler of Temple University School of Medicine. Dean Reiffler.
All right, thank you, Dr. Walreich. And welcome everyone to our third annual Story Slam. We usually do these Story Slams in the building of the college, which is, for those of you who haven't seen it, who may be visiting from afar, it's a stately building that reflects the grandeur of medicine from 1787 when the college was formed, and 1909 or so when the building that the college now occupies was built. That building also houses the Mutter Museum. But this, along with the rest of the world, this event has gone online. And I'm sorry to say we won't be serving cheese, crackers, and wine at the end, which we would normally do and have a nice reception and get a chance to chat with you directly. But we will invite you to give your responses in the chat, particularly after a storyteller has given a story. Please respond, because they won't be able to hear any applause either. We can't see you in this webinar format. And we can't see you applauding on the screen. So use the chat if you would like to express your appreciation for the storytellers. The downside is we can't serve you wine. The upside is the cost and the price of admission have gone down, and we've been able to invite people from literally all over the world to attend. So I welcome you, especially if you haven't been to the College of Physicians. I also look forward to the time when we can gather again in person, vaccinated twice and wearing masks. And unmasked, I mean, sorry. So very, very briefly, Dr. Rita Sharon from Columbia University is among the founders of narrative medicine as a field of study. She has underscored the importance of a sense of story as a basic clinical skill for doctors. Before we can begin to know what to do for patients, we must learn to listen to their stories. As Dr. Catherine Montgomery of Northwestern would add, we must then know how to translate what we hear into doctors' stories and communicate adeptly with both colleagues and patients. Storytelling events like this celebrate and elevate our sense of story. They contribute to the way we find meaning in medicine, which inspires and aids the well-being of physicians and their patients in turn. Even tragedies, and you will hear some tragedies tonight, convey meaning and tell us that we're not alone. So this evening, we've invited each of the 7 metropolitan Philadelphia medical schools to field a team of 2 storytellers, one student and one physician at any level of training or practice. They were chosen individually by the schools, many because they stood out at local storytelling events, and now they are competing in the citywide finals. This will be a heated competition, although it is mainly for bragging rights, and you as the audience will decide the winners at the end. You'll have a chance to vote. But in fact, it is a very low stakes competition where everyone wins by telling a story or by listening to a story. And I hope you all feel that you've gained something by the time the stories are finished. Each storyteller has 5 minutes to tell a story. Unlike the live event, we actually do have a mute button on Zoom, which we've asked the storytellers to respect their time constraints. We'll give you a little leeway. Let's see. And I mentioned that the chat function. So please show your appreciation when they're finished with their telling their stories in the chat. So with that said, our program begins with Harry Rockhour from the Cooper Medical School of Rowan University, who is a second-year resident in internal medicine, telling the dangers of snacking. Dr. Rockhour.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Harry. During my first month of intern year, in my first week on the medicine wards, we were on rounds and we were standing in the hallway, and at the end of the hall, this woman comes bursting out of the room and yells, "Somebody please help, my husband can't breathe." And from where we were standing, I must have been closest to the room because I can just remember my attending looking at me and saying, "Harry, why don't you go see what's going on?" So I start walking down the hallway quickly. I'm wearing my white coat, which I bought a size too big, and I'm wearing my favorite dog tie. And so I walk into the room, and when I get in there, there's this guy sitting up. He has this huge gray beard down to his stomach, and he is blue. And I have never seen anyone this blue before. And on the table next to him is a big bag of cheddar popcorn. And at this point, I kind of freeze and I think to myself, I've just been through 4 years of medical school. We did tests, we did simulations, and we did nothing like this. But what I did remember is that you can sometimes do the Heimlich maneuver with one hand. And so I run over to him and I start pressing on his stomach. And what I didn't realize was that he had a very, very large abdomen. And what I was doing was not going to work. Luckily, there was someone else in the room. And so I had them help me sit him up, and I put my arms around him, and I realized that I can barely get my arms completely around him, but I just have my fingers touching, and I pull as hard as I can. And after about 3 pulls, he starts coughing, and I look over and I see that there is cheddar popcorn now just dribbling down his beard. At this point, my upper level runs into the room and yells, "Get a set of vitals, call a rapid response." To which I think to myself, oh, those are all really good ideas. I wish I had thought of that. So we put on some oxygen and we get a set of vitals, and his O2 stats are starting to come up. And as we're standing there, we hear a booming voice from the corner of the room. And we look over and it says, "How dare you do this to me?" And we all kind of freeze, and we realize that his wife had been in the room the whole time watching all of this. And she continues, "Don't you ever do anything like this to me ever again. I was so scared, I could have died." And we look over at the guy, and he's just exasperated because he legitimately has his breath back in him, and he is being yelled at by his wife, and he does not know what to do in this situation. But everything turned out well. The guy ended up getting through it. He did great. But what I learned from this situation is that no matter what happens, be it life or death or a big bag of cheddar popcorn, somebody always has to have the last word. Thank you.
All right, I'll clap since you can actually hear me. Very nice job, thank you. And there's some applause on the chat there for you. Thank you, Dr. Rockhour. All right, there you go. You see, it's lighting up with appreciation. All right, so thank you. Our next storyteller is Alana Perlow, who is a third-year student, also at Cooper, interested in going into primary care, who will tell the backdrop montage.
Can you hear me okay, everyone? Okay, thank you. All right. When winter days were cut short and the weather too cold, Carla and her cousins would go to their uncle's funeral home after school. There at the funeral home, they would finish their homework on the wooden pews and play tag down the aisles as Carla, an aspiring pianist, filled the room with her new songs and melodies. The children wove through the caskets and competed in tic-tac-toe on the maroon velvet lining as their animal cracker crumbs sprinkled the podium shelves. I met Carla 55 years later when she came on for a follow-up visit. From our first conversation, her conviction was apparent. Carla's daughter, Renee, had called the office the day prior, concerned about her mother's drinking. After losing her father to alcoholism when she was only a child, Renee was appropriately terrified that she would lose her mother to it as well. My husband doesn't want mom around when she's like this, so she hasn't seen our girls in weeks, Renee explained over the phone. As Carla and I began to talk, she brushed off her daughter's worries and shifted the conversation towards her frustration with her son-in-law keeping her grandbabies from her. I'm tired, she exasperated. I'm just tired of all those long days alone in my apartment, of the nights creeping by, of not playing with my granddaughters, and I can't sleep at night. My mind races even after I take my Ambien. I need alcohol to help me sleep. And to top it off, I slipped and hit my head on the bathroom floor this week. God help me. Carla had been drinking the day of the fall, but not more than usual. When she came to herself, she lay on her bathroom floor. No blood in sight, but fear pulsing through her veins. I just got up too fast. I'm just too tired, she stammered, immediately waving off other explanations. Her eyes oscillated from me to the door and back again, finally settling on the floor between us. I let the silence sit, unsure as a new third-year med student how to approach a disease that crept beyond lab values into the vaults of our minds. I sat with her for another moment, trying to stay in the comfort zone of an HPI, then left to update my attending. Dr. Miller had been Carla's primary care physician for years and had seen her at both her highs and her lows. With my brief description, Dr. Miller knew that this was foreign territory for Carla and that this fall might indicate increased alcohol use or worse. When Dr. Miller entered the room, Carla's tensed muscles slightly eased. I'm worried about you. I'm worried about your fall the other day, Dr. Miller confided as she reached over to grab hold of Carla's hands. Let's take this one step at a time. My number one concern right now is possible bleeding in your brain from the fall. Would it be okay if we do a CAT scan today? Carla froze. Her body stiffened and pulled back. No, she replied tersely. What if Alana went with you? Dr. Miller offered, pointing to me in the corner of the room. Carla looked at me, a new medical student, and replied, only if she holds my hand the entire time. 55 years prior, on a typical day of hide-and-go-seek in the funeral home, Carla crawled into a casket near the back, knowing that her cousins wouldn't dare approach the back rows. She climbed in, the padding soft beneath her sneakers. As she lay down with ample room at her sides, the lid wobbled and shut on her. Sudden darkness. Cold sweat pierced her skin as her eyes searched for cracks of light. Carla's fingernails scratched at the crevices, attempting to pry it open, but they shredded the velvet lining. Her screams muffled by her tightness in her throat, the thickness of the casket. Trapped. In the waiting room of the radiology department, Carla squeezed her plastic water bottle too tightly, unsteady drops staining her stuffed purse. We sat together, and Carla began to tell me about her passion for music. She had started private piano lessons at 6 years old and went to major in music at the local university. Now, decades later, she was teaching her twin granddaughters how to play on a weekly basis. Eventually, Carla's name was called, and I wheeled her back to the radiology department to the CAT scanner. She climbed in, The padding soft beneath her sneakers. Sweat coated our fingers as she gripped my hand, her nails chipped and mauve, mine blue and latex, her round, dark eyes locked on mine through the face shield. Her grip tightened as the machine drew her in. With each whir of the machine, I felt her hand squeeze a little harder. I squeezed back. Above the mechanical buzz, she began to sing. At first, her voice was low, and then as she gained strength, it grew louder. I joined her raspy soprano, our voices drowning out the CAT scan's hum. As caregivers in medicine, we try to avoid the ever-present threat of death, to play hide-and-go-seek in death's funeral home. We try to hide behind computer screens, but death seeks us out with tearful locked eyes. We intellectualize by using diagnostic jargon during rounds, but muffled sobs from the unseen patient's rooms seeks us out, undoing our attempts at hiding. Sometimes it's unclear how the places we hide are any different from what we're trapped in. In truth, maybe our role is not to hide ourselves from the pain and those individuals who bear it, but rather to seek out how we can find and connect with each patient who is waiting to be found. My hand in Carla's, our voices in harmony, we looked into death's CT scanning casket only to find each other.
Thank you, Alana. Wonderful story. Very nice. All right, so now you can look at the chat for your audience response. And I will introduce our next storyteller, who from the Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Thomas Jefferson University, ophthalmologist George Spaeth will tell the survival of the competent and the considerate. Dr. Spaeth.
Thank you. It was June 1981. A troubled-looking postdoctoral fellow, let's call him Kurt, came to speak to me. He just lost the job he'd been offered 4 months earlier. The institutional office had called him to cancel. Suddenly, unexpectedly, Kurt in 3 weeks had no professional future. The same day, 2 hours later, the lead investigator at an NIH National Collaborative Study called me. In a worried voice, he told me he needed help. They'd hired a new glaucoma specialist, but just now, 3 weeks before he was due to start, can you believe it, the guy decided not to sign the contract? Do you know somebody you can recommend? I've got just the right person for you. He had just had a job offer pulled. He's already a truly fine surgeon, super smart, excellent with patients, has an MPH from Harvard, has about 10 papers published already. Every day working with him is a pleasure. He's serious, got a good sense of humor, honest, trustworthy, humble, almost too good to be true. The caller asked, where'd he take his residency? Howard. Is he black? Yes. Oh, we couldn't possibly take him. The patients would never see him. I was dumbfounded. End of the call. What was Kurt to do? Academic departments had long since made their choices. Both he and I made calls. Amazingly, within a few days, he got a job with the Los Angeles Department of Health. I encouraged him to take it. He'd make people better. He'd make the department better, and he'd learn a lot. Well, he was disappointed because he wanted to stay near his roots in New York and in a strong department. I didn't tell Kurt that a well-known ophthalmologist hadn't hired him because he was black. Some months later, a crusty, productive ophthalmologist from the largest New York eye department called him to ask him to come work with him. Kurt did that. His fine skills and his gracious attitude soon became well known amongst ophthalmologists. 5 years later, Kurt was the chair of a department of ophthalmology at a large state university. He transformed it into a really fine program. He loved his job and the people there loved him. Kurt has kept in close touch since 1981. When I heard about Story Slam, his experience seemed important to share. I called him to ask him if I could tell the story and to make sure I had the details correct. He said, yes, and as always, we had a substantive talk. I congratulated him on his good life, personally and professionally, showing the grit needed to overcome barriers. His response? George, yes, grit and effort, but the stars were aligned. And I had constant help all along the way. First from my mom, who kicked my butt, and then he added some other people. You know, George, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have any boots. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. The world's not fair. I reflect on Kurt now. Yes, it did seem the stars were aligned, but you and I know that that's not why he made the world a better place. One might say Kurt found the secret to happiness. Transform insults into opportunities by being a good person and living with grit, generosity, and graciousness.
All right, thank you, Dr. Spaeth. It's certainly a tale for troubled times we're in now, and wonderful to have a champion in you as well, I'm sure. All right, so our next storyteller is also from Jefferson, and she is a fourth-year medical student, Michelle Concolly, who is interested in going into pediatric PM&R. That won't know that until March exactly, and she will tell her story, Falling to New Heights. Michelle?
Thank you so much. I pushed my wheelchair down the hallway as my mom walked a few steps behind me, doing all that she could to hold herself back from pushing the chair herself. It was already late, past the time she normally would say goodnight to me at Mickey Rehab Hospital and drive back home to the suburbs. But tonight, I couldn't bring myself to say a cheerful goodbye and thank her for coming. Tonight, I was consumed by fear. What if my legs didn't stop working again? Would my friends still hang out with me? How could I go back to college in a wheelchair? A mother can only answer these questions so many times before breaking into tears herself. Instead of getting on the elevator, she sat down next to me and we cried together. She couldn't promise me that I would walk back onto campus, but she could promise me that if she had to walk beside me and carry my books, she damn sure would. A month prior, I'd been a freshman at Georgetown University and a Division I swimmer. On January 11th, 2011, I was standing on my desk in my dorm room trying to open my window, but I slipped and fell out, 5 stories to the ground. I landed on my feet, but in the process crushed multiple bones, including the L2 vertebrae in my spine. I instantly lost nearly all movement and feeling below my waist. The doctors weren't sure how much, if any, movement I would get back. After 3 surgeries, I was moved to Jefferson's own McGee Rehab, where I spent 5 weeks as an inpatient. This was not exactly how I thought I'd be spending my freshman year of college. But with the incredible support of my family, friends, and teammates, plus the world-class rehab care at McGee, I made steady progress. Sometimes though, like that night with my mom, the reality of what was really happening hit hard. When I first got to McGee, the only movement I had in my legs was a tiny wiggle in one toe. So I sent all of my brain power to my legs, just willing them to move, but nothing was happening. That night with my mom was the peak of my frustration, as I wondered if the muscles in my legs were ever going to come back. But as fate would have it, the very next day, my quad finally flickered. I was going to walk. And 8 months later, I did walk back onto the campus of Georgetown University. I still use a cane sometimes, and I wore bulky men's sneakers with every single outfit, but I carried my own books in my own backpack. I even rejoined the Division I swim team. But some permanent weakness in my legs remained, and it became clear that I would never again be competitive at that collegiate level. But then I discovered the Paralympics, where here I could compete against other athletes with similar physical disabilities. And instead of coming in last, I was coming in first. I had the opportunity to represent Team USA at the Paralympic Games, so I deferred my acceptance to Jefferson Medical College and trained full-time in pursuit of a gold medal. And at the 2016 Paralympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, my first race was the 100-meter freestyle. I came in, I touched the wall as hard as I could, and I looked around to see the scoreboard. I won the gold medal and set a world record. As I got out of the pool, I looked again at my mom with tears in my eyes. But this time, my family and I shared these tears of joy because this moment solidified that after everything we went through, we were going to be okay. I went on to win another gold medal in the 50-meter freestyle, as well as silver and bronze medals in relays. And I see how this experience has shaped the vision of the kind of doctor I want to be. How I'm able to have a perspective that I never would have had I not had the tragedy of falling out of a 5-story window. So, as Doug mentioned, I'm currently applying for pediatric rehabilitation combined residencies. I truly believe that doctors can influence patients' clinical outcomes when they make the patients feel valued and cared for. I hope that the optimism in my story can provide hope to patients experiencing life-altering injuries and illnesses. And I hope that the darker days of my journey can help me relate to patients during their own tough times. At one point or another, we will all fall down. But if we can draw on the strength of those who surround us and keep our setbacks in perspective and use them to propel us, we can reach greater heights than we ever could have imagined. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. That's quite a story, quite an athletic career. Bravo. All right. So thank you, Team Jefferson. We now move on to the Rowan School of Osteopathic Medicine team, starting with the second-year medical student, Walt Abulela, telling shoelaces.
Hi, can we hear me? All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Walt, and this is Shoelaces, the story of how I decided to pursue a medical career. So I was back in my dad's restaurant, and I was a waiter serving pizzas and bagels and whatever have you. And in walked these two guys who were working for IT at a local hospital. I started talking to them, we schmooze it up a little bit, I gave them some food, some sodas, we talk, we eat, we drink. Next thing you know, I'm scrubbed into the OR of a neurosurgeon. And it's everything I ever wanted it to be. I'm seeing blood squirt across the room. I'm smelling smoke, and it's craziness. And so it just becomes my everyday. I'm doing research, I'm seeing brain surgeries, I'm right there. And I thought, wow, this is what medicine's supposed to be like. So we're in the back room, we're looking at some scans, and we're seeing patients. Oh, this guy just came in with a headache. One guy looked exactly like a comedian. Let's call him like Robert Filliams or something, just for like a name. And he goes, yeah, I came in with I fell, my wife made me come into the ER. All of a sudden, oh no, there was a clot, or not there was a mass in his brain. He never would have seen it. And just incidentally, he fell, he got a head CT. Okay, let's do some surgery, get it out. Another woman comes in, she's maybe like 5'2", 120 something pounds, and she's got a mass. Her head's maybe this big, and the tumor is that, at least a softball or grapefruit size. And, you know, these slow growing tumors, all of a sudden, they just happen to show up on a scan with a headache, and you think, this lady's got more tumor in her head than brain. What are we going to do? And so the surgeon turns to me. He says just like this. He goes, "We're brain surgeons, kid. When in doubt, cut it out." And I'm like, this is the corniest thing ever, but that's so cool. I want to do that. And so we go to the operating room, and we spend like 7 hours there from 6 a.m. until like 2, 3 p.m. And I think, wow, this lady had nothing wrong with her, just a headache. And all of a sudden, we found this massive brain tumor. And this was the life-saving moment. He pulled it out. He put it in my hands. I'm holding a brain tumor in my hands. This is what medicine's about. This is the life-saving moment of finding an incidental tumor and cutting it out and doing that glorious life-saving. I did it. I'm holding a brain tumor. I didn't do anything. I was just standing there in the back watching, but I felt like I did it. And so I thought, this is what I got to do with my life. But then the next day it came back, and Robert Filliams was back in the office. It was a couple months later, and I'm wondering, what's the deal? I thought we did the whole cut it out, went into, brain tumor's gone. Why are you back here? And he turns to me in the doc. He goes, "Doc, I came here because I didn't think anything was wrong with me, and all of a sudden I have these problems." 60-something-year-old male presents to the neuro follow-up with post-operative peripheral neuropathy of the distal extremity, ipsilateral postoperative peripheral neuropathy. We had a brain tumor around the left side of his head. All of a sudden, his right hand doesn't work. Oh, that's not what medicine's supposed to be. We're supposed to fix people. "Doc," he says, ever since I was a kid, I had this routine. I would tie my ties, and I would put on my watches. I would tie my shoelaces, put on my belt. I can't do those things anymore, Doc. I can't put on my watch. My wife has to help me get the buttons in my sleeves. I can't do these things. I work with my hands. I make things for my children. I'm here with my granddaughter, and I can't do the things in my life that I used to do. I thought I was fine, and then I came to you, and then my hands don't work. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what to say. Medicine's supposed to help people. It's supposed to be that glorious life-saving moment of cutting out a brain tumor and making everything better and then going home and never seeing the guy again. But here's this guy whose life is ruined. It's because of something we did. And I didn't know what to say. And so I look at the doc, and the doc's not looking at the patient. The doc's looking across the room at this girl's granddaughter, and he says, "Little girl." And she looks up at him with her big, like, 4-year-old eyes, what they do. And he goes, "Little girl, do you know how to tie your shoes?" I'm like, "Doc, what are you saying? This guy just poured his heart out to you. Why are you talking to the little girl and not the patient? We got to talk to the patient. Where's your empathy?" That, like, we have OSCEs in medical school, like the empathy prompt. You're supposed to say something to the patient. This guy's talking to the little girl. Like, what's he doing? This girl was smarter than I am and probably will ever be. She got exactly what he was trying to say. And, "Little girl, do you know how to tie your shoes?" Up she goes onto her grandfather's lap, and before you know, her shoes off and her shoelaces are tangled into this guy's fingers. His face transforms. It's completely changed from, I can't do the things in my life I used to do since I was a boy, to now I have my motivation. Now I have this moment with my granddaughter. We're going to learn to tie our shoes together. And that's what medicine is about. It's not about that glorious life-saving moment of cutting out a brain tumor. It's about treating the patient and making sure that they have what they need, the inspiration they need to continue treatment, to continue physical therapy. And if I can be just a little bit of what that doctor was to Mr. Robert Filliams, I think I'll be all right in my medical career. That story was shoelaces. Thanks for listening.
All right, thank you, Walt. Our next Rowan storyteller is Dr. Elliott Ames, who is an orthopedist and hand surgeon, telling a case to remember. Dr. Ames.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. In December 1985, I was called to the ER to treat a 24-year-old male with a blast injury to his dominant left hand. Having completed a hand surgery fellowship at the University of Louisville 4 months prior, I was now responsible for decision-making regarding his care. In Louisville, the Breedmont was the mantra. If the wound was properly debrided by removing all dirty, damaged, and devitalized tissue, it could be closed primarily, or, if large, covered with a free flap. In this case, with total destruction of the hand and corpus, debridement meant revision. Following his recovery, he was fitted with a myoelectric hand prosthesis, which he wore and used. I remember seeing him in the parking lot of a local outdoor mall when I was bringing in film for development. No digital cameras then. He was wearing his myoelectric hand, thus displaying extraordinary coping skills after a tragic loss. Years later, my receptionist saw an article in the newspaper that my colleague, Warren Breidenbach, MD, from the Kleinert Coots Hand Care Center in Louisville, was planning to do a hand transplant. Shortly after, my former patient previously mentioned called me and asked if I would participate in his pre-op workup and post-op care, as he was scheduled to be the first recipient. I gladly accepted and agreed to participate pro bono. My patient did not know I had completed a hand surgery fellowship in Louisville. Dr. Breidenbach, whom I knew from my year at Louisville, didn't know that the patient had requested me to serve on the quote-unquote merit team. 13 years and 1 month following the injury, Matthew Scott became the recipient of the first U.S. hand transplant performed at the Jewish Hospital in Louisville by a team headed by Warren Breidenbach, MD. Upon his return to New Jersey 3 months post-op, I would see Matt regularly and monitor his therapy. This coming January will mark 22 years since this landmark surgery, which continues to be successful. It is clear that Dr. Breidenbach and his team made the right patient selection. When I first met Matt Scott on that day in December, 35 years ago, December 23rd, 1985 to be exact, my goal was to restore function as best as possible under the circumstances. Vascularized composite tissue allografting never even crossed my mind. It took the vision and expertise of Dr. Breidenbach and the resilience, motivation, and coping skills of Matthew Scott to accomplish what was once impossible. It's often said colloquially that things happen for a reason. The loss of one's dominant hand is a devastating injury. Males in particular are prone to psychological trauma, yet Matthew Scott was able to transcend any negative effects from his injury. He now counsels potential hand transplant recipients and continues to give talks. Matthew Scott has turned a devastating loss into a positive, inspirational outcome. This case truly has been the most unusual and serendipitous experience during my years in practice. It has been an honor for me to have had the opportunity to be part of the Merit team and to have developed a friendship with Matt Scott. The author wishes to acknowledge and thank Matthew Scott for his authorization, encouragement, and contribution in the preparation of this article. Thank you for your time.
All right, wow, that's quite an impressive story. Thank you, Dr. Ames. All right, so we move, thank you to the Rowan osteopathic team. We now move to Drexel University College of Medicine, where our first speaker will be a family medicine intern, Dr. Brittany Bruno, telling the Iron Women. Dr. Bruno.
Hi, good evening. In my 4th year of medical school, I learned that the Iron Women are found in Kawempe Women's Hospital in Kampala, Uganda. It did not take me long to garner an immense amount of respect for the women who become mothers here. They come in with all their delivery supplies all packed up in their large backpacks plastic buckets, or suitcases, walk up the hospital's swirling ramps, laboring or not, and wait in the waiting room. If they are admitted, they are assigned a bed, but if they are not far long enough, they sit and wait on a wooden bench. If there is no space on the bench, then they wait and endure labor on the floor. There is no modesty here. The best way I can describe it is that their bodies are open. Open to be examined, open to be witnessed, open to receiving assistance. Initially, it was quite a shock for me to see so many women so freely open. However, I quickly understood that they weren't on display. They were there to receive help in one of the most painful and natural processes known to man. And they weren't gawked at. They were looked after. The mother I was to deliver was a 19-year-old prime gravid. I had watched all morning as she handled the intensifying phases of labor. At times she would pace, bent up the hips, back and forth beside her bed, almost like a pained cat tethered by her IV line. When the contractions grew stronger, she moved to the floor, repeatedly hitting her thighs desperately, trying to distract herself from the pain. Her cries went from a sort of rhythmic chant in her native Lugandid to now full-body screams she tried to stifle. I had seen other women in the hospital endure the process silently, with pressed lips and beads of sweat that eked out of every pore. Some cried out with stretched fingers, reaching for something I could not see. I had seen women shake, tremble uncontrollably with wide and wild eyes. They slapped their thighs, their backs, the wall, anything to call attention elsewhere, because these women feel each and every contraction. You see, she and all the other women who to deliver there do not receive anesthesia, save for those who go to surgery. The only pain medication they have is whatever mental strength they can muster. Misa wo, Misa wo! They all eventually cry in much more desperate screams than I will ever know. At first, I thought it was a cry for God, but it actually is the name of a medical personnel. All of these women would come to a moment when they would call for a doctor, a nurse, a midwife, a medical student, someone to help them endure. Sometimes there was silence, as the staff knew that there wasn't much they could do for the pain, but to remind her that the contractions would be painful and she would just have to endure. I watched as my prime gravid became more and more restless. She rocked back and forth on hands and knees as sweat dripped from a face that turned with every contraction, until finally it was time. The midwife called me over to ready my gloves and supplies. With careful hands and a heart beating out of my chest, I delivered her first baby boy. Head first, this baby boy slipped into the world and into my hands. Vigorously wiping him down, I placed him into her waiting arms. "Happy birthday," I said, knowing full well that neither he nor she had any idea what I was saying, but I couldn't help myself. After she delivered, she was moved onto a mat to recover for 2 hours. This was largely done because the space was so limited and the turnover rate was very high and very fast. I neglected to mention that this hospital, they deliver anywhere from 40 to 60 babies in a day. And as she laid there, she was so calm with her new creation. She had just gone through one of the most natural and most painful experiences known to man. And to look at her now, so quiet and reposed, you would have never known what she just went through. Sometimes fast and swift, often painful, and sometimes long, women became mothers here over and over again. These women who embodied life experienced its pain, discomfort, and found their incredible strength. These are the Island women of Kawempe. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Bruno. That's quite a story. Okay, so rounding out the Drexel team is a third-year medical student, Abby Watson, who will tell the death of a classmate.
Hello, my name's Abby. So last night, a woman in a large SUV tailgated my husband and me as we drove through our apartment complex's parking lot. I mean, she was so close that you couldn't see her headlights in the rearview mirror. She tried to cut us off and go around us to beat us to a parking spot. And when we parked, she pulled up next to us and parked illegally, blocking in a neighbor's car. And when I told her that's actually not a parking spot, she slid her window down about 4 inches and stuck her lips out and told me to mind my own business. And when I got home, I turned to my husband and I asked, why am I doing this? Why am I in medical school giving myself clinical depression? People are awful. Mental illness and burnout are not uncommon in medical school students across the globe. While 7% of US adults are estimated to have depression and 4% with suicidal ideations, 27% of medical students have depressive symptoms and 11% have suicidal ideations. 27%. That's more than 1 in 4 of us. I myself was diagnosed with depression last fall after we were reviewing clinical psychiatry, and I found myself relating a little bit too much to the diagnostic criteria of depression in the DSM-5. For the longest time, I accepted my symptoms. I recognized them as depression, or at the very least, not quite right, and rationalized them as the sacrifice that we make, the price that we pay for the privilege to learn what we learn and do what we do. Eventually, that depression turns to resentment. Resentment over the fact that we have sacrificed so much and knowingly will continue to do so to succeed in medicine and become a doctor. And for what? So I can tie a neck brace around the woman from the SUV who now has whiplash after she rear-ends somebody because she was tailgating while she hisses at me to mind my own business. Despite medication and therapy, I could feel that bitterness fester in me. That is until a classmate died. Vivek was only 23 years old when he died in an accident. I didn't know him that well. I was his TA when he was an undergrad and I a graduate student in Introduction to Epidemiology. He was the year above me in medical school, which is odd, but something I've had to move past, as it's a relatively common occurrence for me to be classmates with my once students. I don't know if I made any sort of a difference in his life, but he and his death and the students' bodies' reactions to his death made a profound difference in mine. There was a moment of remembrance held in front of the half-cast Drexel flag. A lot of us showed up, students and faculty alike, those who knew him and caught their tears in napkins or tissues, or let them fall down their face in streams of silver, and those who did not, but who came to support the tear-stained faces with hugs, folded hands, or a simple hand on the shoulder. And long after the dean's short speech on why we had gathered had ended, we remained there in front of our school together. Vivek and my classmates have given something precious back to me. The reason why I pull myself through seemingly never-ending lectures and videos, why I pass up on date nights, girls' nights out, and time I want to be binging Netflix on my couch, painting, hiking, pretty much doing anything other than studying. Why I collapse on my couch, incapable of mustering the motivation to cook dinner or even eat dinner, because I put all of my energy into memorizing the facial nerves and the drugs to treat rheumatoid arthritis. Because human life is fleeting, but precious. And human connection is valuable, irreplaceable, irreplicable, and it touches us all. And that's something worth saving.
All right, thank you, Abby. That's a difficult, tough story. Thank you for telling that one. We are now up to the Perlman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania team, starting with And we have to ask Dr. Song also, in her bio in the program, she indicated that she was matching for fellowship. She's a third-year resident in internal medicine, and she was applying to palliative medicine fellowships. We have to ask her where she matched. But she will tell the story, The Mirror. Dr. Song.
Thank you, Dr. Reiffler. I did match to stay at Penn. Thank you for the introduction.
Congratulations.
They just don't get it. He sat next to his mother, their ICU room cloaked in darkness. The silence was broken only by her rhythmic breaths, breaths he might have found soothing if they were not so mechanical, and if they were not a reminder of her dying and what was keeping her alive. She told us she wanted to do everything. Those were her last words, but there was nothing more that we could do. Each time I walked by their room, we locked eyes through the glass window that separated us. Hour by hour, overnight, he gazed out, alone, with his thoughts, his worries and fears, his pain and grief. Alone, with his mother's breaths. How many more? They're so unreasonable. She stood next to her father, surveying him as he lied there, barely recognizable. He was intubated, sedated, his body wrapped in pads to cool his temperature to 33 degrees after he had suffered a cardiac arrest just a few short hours prior. She leaned in, yearning to hug him, but settled for holding his hand instead and not letting go. He had just been at home with his family the day before, gathering to celebrate the holidays together. Desperately, her eyes brimming with tears and searching for answers, she looked to me and asked, "What would you do? What would you do if this was your dad?" How could they do this to their family? He stood next to his uncle. He had been here before, far too many times to count. Our team had called him in once again with bad news. But before I could even speak, he broke down in tears and wept. "I'm sorry. I know what you're asking me to do, but I cannot make this decision. It's not mine to make. It's God's." No one would ever want to live like that. I sat next to my father, clutching his hand, failing to comprehend what had happened. He had been playing basketball, as he loves to do. He had stood at the top of the key, trailing the play as he loves to do, whipping passes across the court, directing the offense, his height belying his natural preference and instinct to play as the point guard. As his teammate's shot bounced off the rim, he had started backpedaling to prevent the fast break. Defense first, as he had always preached. And that was it. He had suffered a cardiac arrest at mid-court. And then he returned to us with severe anoxic brain injury. And the critical care attending now looked at me, intently, expectantly, as if I should have the right answer as the intern that I was. And he said, "It's time to make some decisions." What kinds of decisions are we asking the loved ones of our patients to make? And then what extrapolations and assumptions do we make of them based on these moments of pure heartbreak and agony? When all anyone really wants is to be a good son and honor his mother's final wish, to be a loving daughter, and in facing uncertainty, choose what provides the peace of mind that her father had been given every chance, to be a faithful nephew and respect their family's culture and religion and the sanctity of every breath. to be a loyal daughter and sister and granddaughter, and not a doctor, and make not the decision that was expected of me, but the decision I could only guess my father would want. To live for his family, and to breathe life into hope when it threatened to fade into extinction. Unreasonable. They don't get it. How could they do this when we are tempted to ask such questions and say such things, when we are failing to understand? Perhaps we could instead pause, take a step back from the glass that separates us from our patients and their families, and try to imagine, if we can, a mirror instead.
Okay, wow. All right, thank you, Dr. Song, for telling a very tough and powerful story. All right. Our next storyteller, also from the University of Pennsylvania, is a PhD and an MD student in the 4th year of medical school, applying to residency in surgery, Diviance Agarwal, who will tell Strength in Adversity.
Of all my clinical experiences, there is one that will stay with me forever. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon last August. Our penultimate patient for the day was a 20-year-old woman whom I'll call Amy. Amy was a college junior, and this was her first visit to the clinic. I thought this would be a simple new patient visit, and with that in mind, I entered the room. I saw a 5'2" short-haired woman sitting at one corner of the room in a gray chair, staring at the floor. But her gaze was constantly sweeping the floor, as if she was searching for something. She was looking for something. I wondered what that could be. "Hi, Miss Amy. I'm part of your care team today." Silence. She continued to stare. "Miss Amy?" And as soon as her eyes lifted up, tears rolled down her eyes. Her lips began to tremble as if she was at the precipice of describing something, but just not finding the right words or the courage to say it. A friend of hers had physically forced her into having intercourse the night before. Her voice grew somber as she recalled the trauma. She began trembling. Her feet began nervously tapping. Her voice cracked, and you could tell the fear, guilt, and pressure Amy must have felt in that moment. This was my first time hearing about sexual violence firsthand from a victim. What is the most helpful thing to do? How could I have best comforted her? None of my classroom lessons had prepared me for this moment. Not knowing how to exactly proceed, I thought the best thing I could do is to just be with her in the moment. I frequently let her know that she always had the option to not share any details that made her uncomfortable. As I engaged in the conversation, I could see slowly the tapping of the legs stopped. She assumed a more relaxed posture. 20 minutes in, she finally looked at me for the first time. We continued to chat, and the next thing I know, 40 minutes had gone by. She thanked me for being there with her, and I was grateful that she had put her trust in me. I was grateful for the strength in adversity that she showed me. Thank you. Thank you. I left the room, stepped out, and briefed the attending. Together, we went back in and offered her additional resources to pursue, connecting her with subsequent colleagues. In that moment, I realized that Amy and I had managed to connect at a level that I could not put into words. There was a magic in that moment wherein I realized that I had perhaps managed to connect with the underlying emotions, the fear, the trepidation. It is truly heartrending that 1 in 16 women experience their first sexual intercourse as a result of physical force. That 4 out of 5 rapes today are committed by a victim's acquaintance. To every medical practitioner, these facts ought to be appalling. As much as the memories of that day are gut-wrenching and hard to think about, Amy taught me the public health threat that sexual violence poses to our society. She continues to motivate me to actively encourage positive social norms around me, just as I hope the story does to all the listeners.
All right, thank you, Diviance. A very tough story. Okay, our next speaker representing the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine is Dr. Gregory Mcdonald, who is the department chair of forensic medicine and pathology, telling the story, A Grisly Tale of Murder.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. And yes, this is not a feel-good story. This is a story of murder. And as a forensic pathologist, when I was working in Philadelphia, I got a call one warm, sunny day that the police had found a dismembered body in a home in Philadelphia. I was called to the scene to evaluate and to account for all the missing body parts, if there were any. Upon my arrival at the scene, I was directed to the kitchen, specifically the refrigerator and freezer. As I opened the refrigerator and its adjacent freezer, I saw a bag of frozen broccoli, a bag of frozen shrimp, ice cube trays, and neatly wrapped in plastic bags, a human head, forearms, 2 forearms and hands, and 2 lower legs. I was then directed to the basement, where wrapped in trash bags was the torso, the upper torso, the pelvis, and the upper legs. These remains were taken to the medical examiner's office where an autopsy was conducted. That autopsy revealed that the cause of death was actually strangulation, and the dismemberment had occurred and decapitation had occurred after death. Upon reviewing the body, we identified it as a 70-year-old male or male in his 70s. And the autopsy revealed that the femurs were both cut through their shaft. Several long bones were also cut through their shaft. The 3rd lumbar vertebrae was cut, most likely by something fairly significant, a hacksaw or something that had a lot of force to it, and it took a lot of force to cut through these bones. For those of you in medicine know that the femur is a very thick bone and it's not easy to cut through. Remember that, that's going to be important in this story. The 2 suspects in this case were the decedent's wife, a woman in her 70s, with emphysema, arthritis, and the other suspect was the decedent's son. A young man, probably in his late 20s, early 30s, had done some time in jail, was fairly muscular and fit. The case came to trial several years later. In the interim, the mother had died of a drug overdose. So the only one to stand trial was the son. During 2 to 3 hours of cross examination on the stand by 2 very aggressive defense attorneys, I was asked how this could happen. And they opined that the decedent, being in his 70s, had osteoporosis. And it must have been fairly easy to cut through femurs, the lumbar vertebrae, the radius ulna, the humerus, to which I countered that I saw no signs of osteoporosis in this individual at death. And I found myself giving a lecture to the jurors on osteoporosis. I was talking about osteoclasts and osteoblasts and the role of vitamin D and the role of exercise and diet in osteoporosis. And so I spent, I did not expect that as a part of the cross-examination, quite frankly, in this case. And it went on, and the attorneys were fairly aggressive. They came at me pretty strongly, and they were, what their thought was that the wife, 70 years old, arthritic, emphysematous, that she did this, not the muscular, strong 30-something or early or late 20s, early 30-something ex-con. I testified. They deliberated for several hours. The verdict came back, but I'm sorry, I'm out of time. Have a great day.
If you want to finish the story, you still have a little bit there. You can't leave us hanging there and complete.
Okay, all right. Well, there's the hook. He was convicted. He was convicted of first-degree murder, and I believe he is still doing jail time. To my relief, thank you. But thank you all. Have a great night.
Oops. Okay, well, thank you for that story, and thank you also for the trigger warning at the beginning. I think that was well suited to the story. That's a graphic one for those who have not been through gross anatomy. I'm sure that's and even for those who have, that was not an easy story. Okay, but it sounds like you helped with the cause of justice. All right, so now we're down to the Temple team. Starting with Dr. Sue Gersh, who is a general internist, and she will tell My Mom, the prequel.
Thank you. My Mom, the prequel. It is a cruel trick of nature to take away something that is most valued, something that is at the core essence of a woman whose self-identity and self-worth was manifest in her brilliance, in her lifelong love of learning and teaching, and in her role as a trailblazer for women in medicine. This is the situation of my 90-year-old mother, Annabelle Schaefer, MD, who suffers from advanced Alzheimer's, and I'm losing her. She was a pioneer, a doctor when it was almost impossible for women to become doctors, and I honor her by telling you her story. Born in Brooklyn in 1929, daughter of Solomon and Minnie Vinkow, 2 poor Jewish immigrant parents from Eastern Europe, at the age of 9, her father died of a post-operative pneumonia, only 2 short years before the advent of antibiotics to cure infection. After graduating from high school at age 16, she enrolled in Brooklyn College, which had free tuition. Maybe Bernie has something here. Annabelle fell in love with science and planned for a career as a high school biology teacher. When she was in college, she took a job in a hospital lab where she interacted with medical interns and realized that she was just as smart as they were, so why not take a chance and apply to medical school? She was accepted on full scholarship into State University of New York College of Medicine, class of 1956. Only one of 12 women in a class of 120, and only one of 12 Jews. That was the 10% limit then. Minnie, her mom, called all the friends and relatives, announcing proudly, "Annabelle is gonna be a doctor." She started her career on a high note with her first job out of residency as division chief of pediatrics at Pima County Hospital in Arizona. She married my father, who was in the service, and moved with him to Arizona, and convinced Pima County to create a division of pediatrics, which they did, and then she became division chief of a division of 1. She never took no for an answer. Her career continued to blossom. She became a full professor at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where she loved to do teaching of medical students and pediatric residents, and worked there until 1986, when at the age of 57, she decided to retire for one day. She was offered a position running the pediatrics teaching program at Kings County Hospital, which she did for the next 10 years until she retired again at age 67. As her love for learning and teaching could not be stopped, in less than a year, she took a position for the next 9 years, directing the pediatric clerkship at New York Medical College. She finally retired at age 77. She was in the hospital earlier this year, and our visit went something like this. "Hi, Mom. My Susie, isn't she beautiful? How are you doing, Mom? I don't really know. I don't remember. What's with this outfit? It's a hospital gown. And this thing? It's a blanket to keep you warm. Oh, is this what they're wearing here these days? Yes, Mom, it's standard hospital attire. Are you comfortable? Yeah." I try to dig down to reconnect with some part of her. Amazingly, and not surprisingly, it's the dirty jokes she remembers. I reminded her of one she liked to tell. "Mom, I'm ordering a honeymoon salad," I told her. Wait, she replied, "I know this one. Lettuce alone with no dressing." She smiled with accomplishment, and we both laughed. "Yes, Mom, very good. What do I have to do now?" "Nothing, Mom, relax, I love you." I realize that not only am I losing my mother, but I'm losing a piece of myself. And I would like to finish with this poem I wrote a few years ago. Mom, you are the memory holder, the placeholder of my life, holding all that has happened to me since my first breath and before. Knowing me better than anyone and watching my evolution from childhood to adulthood, from tadpole to frog, from caterpillar to butterfly. The story of me is held by you. This was the promise of our relationship. As your memory fades day by day, a piece of me dies. My 18-month vocabulary that you were so proud of and meticulously wrote down to share with me, the first ride on the blue two-wheeler that left that tiny scar on my lower lip, that was our shared memory. Now it's mine alone. The 2 red ear slider turtles that you bought for us as pets, but first swabbed their cloaca for salmonella, a vivid memory for me, an imagined story of another family to you. The college tour trip singing Jack and Diane, drinking cheap beer in cheap hotel rooms and eating horrible Chinese food, a memory for me alone now. Who will verify that the life I lived existed before adulthood? Who will smile and tell everyone about the little tuft of red hair that I was born with that you cut off to show me, and then a full head of red hair grew in, and how adorable and bright I was? I can't tell this story in the way you could and did and never will again. My childhood existence, the story of me. A beautiful, elaborate sandcastle as the tide rolls in was never there as the tide rolls out again. This was our contract, your promise to me as mother, as placeholder of my childhood memories, especially the ones I was too young to remember, of the evolution of my being as a giver of life and now frivolously tossing to the wind those memories that cannot be retrieved, and each day a piece of me dies. On July 4th, 2020, my mom lost her battle with Alzheimer's and died peacefully on hospice at Waverly Heights Community Center. I love you, Mom. I miss you. I miss us.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gersh. All right, and finally, our last storyteller, 4th-year student from Temple, Emily Descope, who is applying in internal medicine, who will tell a story called The Undressing. You need to unmute, Emily.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the following is a scene that happened in a hospital in France this past April. He was my afternoon admission, and I was not supposed to see him naked, but his nurse needed help undressing him. He sat near the bed, hard of hearing, partially blind, a long-legged man, unstooped by his age, yet made small in the corner. We undressed him carefully, and I was reminded of how my sisters and I had, as children, dressed and undressed our dolls. His useless, boneless legs dangled like seaweed, and I knelt down to unlace his shoes. I remember he had red socks of a very fine wool. I remember the softness of his sweater, the starchiness of his collar, the fine lawn of his shirt, the diaper. We took it off, the nurse and I stood there and watched the urine stream into the bedpan. It was as though I were watching sap run from a tree. His penis was floppy, ruddy, a few sparse hairs covered his slack and wrinkled scrotum. Just another old man's body. The sun was warm on my neck and my mind drifted. I had even, at that moment, forgotten his name. "Turn him over to your side," the nurse instructed as she put a fresh diaper beneath him. I reached under his armpits and pulled him towards me. He curled into me on his flank, the white flesh of his thighs touching my side as I leaned in, his torso against my torso, his breath against my neck. I could feel the warmth of him, animal, alive, around me. We dressed him in a clean hospital gown, and I tried to get on with the interview, but he replied in monosyllables, if at all. The entire time I was with him, he produced only a single complete sentence. I had asked him if he had help at home, and he had answered, "My wife, she does everything. She's a goddess." But we did not get much further than that. So I left him. I left his room and called his wife, hoping she could tell me what had brought him to the hospital. She answered the phone in the clear, direct French of my great aunts, and she painted a picture not of a sick man, but of her husband. It was almost as though his months of weakness, his worsening confusion, and more recently his fever and cough, were peripheral to her real conversation. She was far more eager to tell me how he had been a translator, an intellectual, she said, and how he was even now working on his latest manuscript. But it was getting difficult, she said, quite difficult. He was, his wife told me, a naturally silent man, a man who weighed his words so carefully he had, once in the past, refused to speak to save himself. "I saw him do it," she said, ruin himself in silence. She did not elaborate. She reassured me kindly that if, sometimes, he was rude, I shouldn't let it bother me, because he was just that way. And I heard it in her voice, the weight of her years. They lived a solitary life, not much changed by this new period of confinement, though he had, before, loved to walk through the streets of Paris. "He loves the city," she said. She told me about how he loved life and thought often of death, how he had understood it was coming, and she told me of his courage. In less time than it takes to unclothe, she had stripped him clean and handed him to me naked. It was indecent. I had been comfortable with his naked body in a way that I was not now comfortable with his naked soul, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't make him just a body again. Just before ending the call, she hesitated. "Do you think you would enjoy a picture of me by his bed?" Her disembodied voice at the other end of the line was suddenly young, younger than mine. I didn't answer. I reassured her, of course, that she could bring one and we'd place it on his nightstand. But I didn't answer the question. And she asked me again, "But do you think you would like a picture of me?" 3 times she asked me. 3 times I hedged. I did not understand it then, but that evening over the telephone, she was not asking me whether he would like a picture of her. She was asking me whether he loved her. I was angry. She had stood sentinel over his manuscripts, traced his peregrinations through Paris, watched him ruin himself in silence, tied his shoes, cooked his food, counted his words, dissected his courage, and she had done it all, not knowing if he would enjoy a picture of her face. And in the nakedness of her question, she had turned towards me. "What do I know of your marriage, Madame?" I wanted to say. "What do I know of his love? I am a stranger, and I am young." But I did know, didn't I? "My wife," he had said. "She is a goddess." Such a gaudy statement, but it came from a man who lifted his eyelids the way some men wage wars, a man with no breath left for elegance, and in its awkwardness was its truth. I felt how much she needed me to say it, how the want of it pressed, fluttering in her throat. Yet I can still feel them, the pale, miserable words sitting inside me, naked, unborn. Perhaps I am making too much of this. Perhaps, in the morning, when she brushes his hair and puts on his diaper, he whispers words of gratitude, of tenderness, of love. Perhaps, in the evening, as she kneels as in prayer at his dangling feet and takes off his shoes, he calls her my goddess. Perhaps, though he is not, as his wife has pointed out, a man of many words.
Wow. Okay, thank you, Emily. Okay, so now comes the moment of truth. We take a deep breath, absorb some of the wonderful, sad, inspiring, and profound things that these storytellers have given us. In fact, before we run our poll, our voting for the best story, let's just take a minute to give them what would be a virtual round of applause to the panel for their stories. I think they did a phenomenal job, and I hope you all agree with me. Yes. There we go. You can see the applause running through the chat there. Thank you all. I hope you. It's too bad it's we can't hear it, but hopefully you can see that there. All right. So the next the final thing to do here is to we need to ask Samantha, our host, to set us up with the poll. Okay, now you should see on your screen, and I will tell you that there are, oh, let's see, yeah, so this is a little funny because the Zoom format only allows 10 items on a question. So in order to vote for 13 people, you have to answer 2 questions. If you want to vote for somebody in the second half of the list, you need to answer other for the first question, and then answer the storyteller in the second half. And vice versa, if you want to vote for somebody in the first half of the list, vote for them, and then answer other in the second. I think you need to put 2 answers in for your vote to be counted and not rejected by the Georgia voting recount. So we'll take a few minutes, a minute here, and then once let's see. Well, let's give people about 2 minutes to vote, and if you want to continue commenting in the chat, we invite you to do that as well. Okay, wonderful. Well, it was a close contest, but I'm going to start with a tie for second place. We have 3 winners. Well, I'll tell you what. Since we have a tie for second place, we'll have 4 winners. So here's the prizes, first of all, for the third place prize. And these are all gifts from the Mutter Museum gift shop. This is a glute sticky notepad. There are 100 sheets of this. It's a sticky notepad that displays important anatomic structures. And in third place, third place, we have Walt Abulela, who told us his story of shoelaces. Congratulations, Walt. Let's see if we can put Walt back on for a minute. Or is that, I guess I'm sharing my screen. Congratulations, Walt. I don't know if you can highlight Walt.
Yeah, thanks guys. Cool. Glad you like the story.
Okay, second place, and this was a tie, so we have 2 winners in second place. And the prize for second place is also from the gift shop. It's a Spit Spreads Death mask, which was actually, I think, well, I don't know if they were masks, but there was an exhibit at the museum on the influenza pandemic of 1918. And of course, this is quite pertinent. That was a motto to avoid spread of influenza in 1918 is equally applicable.
Doug, when we reopen, that exhibit is still on and will be up for a while.
Okay, good to know. So the tie for second place goes to Dr. Song and to Emily Descoupé. Congratulations to our second place storytellers. Wonderful job. And drum roll, please, for the first place winner will receive a Mutter Museum Heart Plush for telling the favorite story of the audience. And this story goes to Dr. Brittany Bruno, telling the story of the Iron Women. Dr. Bruno, congratulations, you are our first place winner. Now, I don't know
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, so the last thing that I will mention here is, and show you on the screen, is that we will send all of our storytellers, who, as I have repeatedly said now, are all winners, a copy of the book Grit, Gravity, and Grace, which is a collection of poems by physicians published by the college, edited by Rhonda Soroselli and Jack Houlihan. We will all get a copy of that as our measure of thanks for your participation and your wonderful contributions. So with that said, I believe that concludes our third annual Story Slam. Thank you again to our storytellers. Let's see if I can stop sharing my screen. Congratulations to all.
Doug, as the host, I just want to make a farewell comment. I'm going to sleep a lot better tonight, knowing there's such terrific caliber of younger doctors coming up. And that is really going to help me sleep well tonight.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Walreich. Thank you to our storytellers. Thank you to our audience. And we will hopefully see you next year in person in the College of Physicians of Philadelphia.